We're going to see how it works. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We skipped a month last month because we are very, very busy right now. And Anna is kicking us off today with our first of three webinars this month. It is Adolescent Health Month and Mental Health Awareness Month and Foster Care Awareness Month, and it is all the things. So thank you for joining us for that and kicking us off. And then we have three scheduled for next month as well. So all of that information will be coming out as well. So yay, here we go. I'm just going to do this quick little intro, and then I'm going to let you get started.
Sounds good.
All right, so who is Mission West Virginia? Mission West Virginia helps youth and families build brighter futures. We support families in foster care and provide life skills education that helps teens make healthy, informed choices. We work closely with schools, social services, and community partners across the state. You can learn more at missionwv.org. We do this through three primary programs that we have running right now, but first is Frameworks, which helps individuals interested in foster or kinship care. We explain the process, connect families with placement agencies, and help them prepare to support a child in their home. If you want to learn more about becoming a foster or adoptive parent, please give us a call at the office, 866-CALL-MWV, or you can request an information packet on our website. We have the Bridge program, which guides foster care students towards their education goals. We support more than 300 students each year. I think we're actually up to around 500 students this year with educational advocacy, mentoring, enrichment activities, college funding support, post-secondary planning, and a whole lot more. Students show consistent improvement in attendance, behavior, and grades, and every high school senior continues on with a post-secondary plan. And then our Think program, which is sponsoring today's webinar, equips teens with the skills they need to make healthy choices about relationships, substances, and their futures. Our curriculum is evidence-based and designed to meet the real pressures teens face. Our educators are highly trained, vetted, and supported through on-site observations, pre-post surveys, teacher and student feedback, and this ensures the program stays consistent, effective, and responsive to student needs. We also provide workshops and trainings like this webinar today to help equip parents, caregivers, and youth serving professionals with practical tools. Some of our workshops may include talking to youth about difficult topics, hidden in plain sight, trauma, consent and sexual assault prevention, and teen dating violence. We offer social work CEUs for our presentation. Today's presentation is worth 1.5 hours. Certificates will be processed next week, so look for that. If you do not receive your certificate, check your spam folder first, but then contact us here at Mission and we'll get that certificate out to you. They will come from a site called Simple Cert. It will not come from Mission West Virginia itself. Now let's meet our speaker. We are super excited to have Anna with us today. She is one of our beloved educators for the Think program. She moved on up, left us sad, but that's okay because she's doing amazing things now. And again, I just really thank you. We're super grateful to have you back with us today. We miss you.
Miss you
Um,
guys.
So Anna is a West Virginia native who has spent most of her life serving in the world of youth and families. She's a wife, a mother of two, and holds a degree in education with many trainings under trust-based relational intervention methods. Anna now works with For the Children, a nonprofit organization working to heal the hearts of children who've experienced family-induced trauma and create life-changing moments for children in foster care through camp and mentoring programs across the U.S. and internationally. So again, thank you for joining us today. I want to do two quick shout outs before you get started. Two other things. One, I want to plug our behind the screen event. Look for our Facebook page and your emails for information on that. That is an in-person training we're hosting on June 2nd at the Civic Center in Charleston with the FBI, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the West Virginia State Police, Kanawha County Sheriff's Office, and Jim Harris will be joining us that day. It is $75, breakfast and lunch included, and 5.5 social work CEUs available for that. Going to be a really good event. So check out more information on that. And also, I do not have a link for the evaluation today. So please look for your emails, follow-up email about this presentation to complete your evaluation for today. Please and thank you. And now I'm going to stop sharing and hand this over.
Okay, let me see if my technology skills can work because you never know. Okay, let's see. Are we seeing my screen? Let's
It changed. It said your screen sharing. Oh, yep, there we go.
got it. All right. That's always the hardest part is making sure the technology works, at least, you know. So everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for jumping on this webinar today. As Hillary said, my name is Anna Beatty. I am a former Think educator. My degree is in education, certified from pre-K to high school, but I found myself teaching kindergarten for a few years, and then I found Mission West Virginia, and I absolutely love this world of work. At 18 years old, I decided this is what I want to be able to do with my life is serve the population of children who need it the most. And Mission was a wonderful opportunity to do that. I got to go into schools for several years teaching middle and high school students about healthy relationships and communication. And now, as Hillary said, I am with For the Children. So she read that little thing about me, but For the Children is a nonprofit organization that is actually based in California, but we serve almost every state in the US. We're in 45 states in the US, and then internationally as well. And the way that we do that currently is through a camp program called Royal Family Kids Camp, a mentoring program called Royal Family Kids Mentoring, and we just added a program called Bridge to Belonging, which instead of directly serving kids, that program teaches adults how to serve kids. And so I have the opportunity to be with kiddos who are in foster care or kinship care all year long. And we provide resources and we train volunteers, and we have these camps and mentoring programs designed to create life-changing moments and promote healing in these kiddos. So my presentation today is really going to come from that place that I'm used to serving, which is the kiddos ages 6 to 12. And you're going to see a lot of camp pictures in my presentation that we do at our camps and mentoring programs. But my goal today is to, one, help you understand how trauma really does affect the brain. I'm so thankful that there are so many resources and programs and organizations out there that are building the awareness that trauma exists and it does impact our brain, especially in these kiddos we're working with. I'm so thankful for that, but I still think that our natural tendency is to not remember that always. And so I want to help us remember how trauma impacts the brain. And then with that information, I'm going to talk about how we can view each other through a trauma-sensitive lens and what that actually practically looks like to see a child through the eyes of someone who has the understanding of a background that we might not be able to see. And then lastly, I want to talk about how to build relationships and trust. As Hillary mentioned in my bio, I have done extensive training with a method or a model called trust-based relational intervention, so TBRI. And this whole model focuses on building trust with someone before you can build on top of that. And specifically with kiddos, because we know with kiddos, there's going to be a correction piece at some point because they need those adults, those mentors to love and guide. But in order to correct, we have to build upon trust. And so that will be the last part there. And this, I know I was looking through the comments of who's here and where you're from and all of those things, and that's fantastic. A lot of you, it looks like, are licensed professionals in this field. And so while some of this information specifically around the brain might not be new for you because this is what you do, I hope that it brings a perspective on how we can interact with one another, and not just, while it is focused on children, I hope that we have takeaways for our relationships with adults too, because it's not only kiddos that are experiencing that. trauma background. It's adults too. And I think sometimes when we hit a certain age, we forget that adults were once those kiddos. And even those who don't have a trauma background, I was just talking about this last night with my kiddos. These these tools don't just apply to kiddos who have experienced trauma. They apply to all people learning and growing. And so sometimes we forget to handle with care, regardless of the background. So that's my goal today. All right, so section 1, how trauma impacts our brain. Now, usually the first question, and when I was teaching with Mission West Virginia, we did a lot on the structure of the brain. And so many times students would come up to me after that presentation and say, that makes so much sense. I understand why I respond the way I respond or why I do what I do. And it really empowered them to know that there was a reason behind their actions. But a lot of times, one of the first questions they would say is, well, what's trauma? Does this count? Does this count? Everybody wants that stamp of this is what trauma is defined as. And really, I can't define that, right? Because everybody's response is different. Everybody's tolerance is different. Everybody's range is different. I heard someone say once that was running a marathon and someone else came up and said, yeah, I just ran my first 5K. And the instinct is to be like, well, a 5K is nothing compared to a marathon. But a 5K was something to that person who had never done anything, right? So we can't really judge the level of what trauma is defined as, but what we can say is trauma is something that has deeply impacted someone in a way that their brain isn't always able to process. And this could be, and a lot of people forget about that this could be even in the womb. This can be when they're first born. This could be when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This could be when they're 60, right? There is no definition that says trauma has to happen in this way and at this age. I had a really, really difficult pregnancy with my first child, and he was born at 31 weeks. And the pregnancy was difficult, but then he was in the NICU for a while and on oxygen for a while. And there are things that his body responds to and his nervous system responds to solely because of that. Does he remember being hooked up to tubes and oxygen and all that? No. But The Body Keeps the Score, which is an incredible book that I recommend if you haven't read that you read it. And so we have to come from an approach where we remember that very thing. The body keeps the score. So this is a model of our brain, and really I'm going to focus on 3 main parts. The first part is the front part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And most of you on this call probably know that is your decision making, that is your impulse control. That's how we focus. That's like, oh, this is what I should do, what I shouldn't do. And that controls our emotions. If you've ever met a toddler, you know their prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. Their responses to things are absolutely off the wall. And to us with developed prefrontal cortexes, we think that is absurd. But to their little brain, that's not functioning yet. So they don't have that ability to say, oh, this is what I should do and shouldn't do, or this is the appropriate response. Your prefrontal cortex, as most of you know, finishes developing around the age of 25. So when we're talking about our kids, our teens, and even our young adults, that is not fully cooked yet. And that is a very important thing to remember when working with the kids that we serve. The other part of the brain is the hippocampus, which is responsible for your memory, how we learn and process. And so that is also a part of the brain that is very impacted by trauma and development and isn't always the most reliable in those cases. And then we have finally the amygdala, which is down on the more the lower part of the brain. And this is also emotional processing, but this is your threat detection. So that classic fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses that we have. I like to have different names for these parts of the brain, especially when I'm working with children. So a lot of times we think, especially if you're licensed and you're practicing in the field of therapy or social work or whatever it may be, um, we know this information as working adults, but we don't think about sharing it with the kiddos. And I would just like to encourage you that you can teach them about their brain and you can do it in a way that makes sense to them and is actually an empowering tool to them and a communication benefit to them. So instead of the prefrontal cortex, I like to call this guy your wise owl. He's, if you know anything about an owl, they're watching, they're always observing. And so this part of your brain is our wise part, our smart part that's thinking and processing and looking. Then we have our hippocampus, which we like to call our happy hippo because hopefully we want those memories stored to be happy and fun. And so he's our happy hippo. And then the amygdala part of your brain is the watchdog. Now, when we're working with kids, right, we can say, okay, your watchdog, what do watchdogs do? If you have a dog that somebody knocks on the door, they're going to start barking really loud, right? And that can be startling and it can kind of overtake all the sound that you hear and everything that you're feeling and can be kind of overstimulating. And our brain often does the same thing to us. And so I also have a model that I like to use, especially when I'm working with kiddos. And in order to do that, I use my hand, and I know my picture is probably small, so hopefully you can see this. But we pretend that our hand is the brain, and we put our thumb like this, and our thumb right here is our amygdala, and our fingers up here, we close that down over. That is our wise owl or our prefrontal cortex. And then back here, this back part is our hippocampus or our happy hippo. So when we're working with kiddos, I like to have them do this model with me so that they understand. When a child or an adult, but especially a child, and especially in those developmental years, which again can be any time before that prefrontal cortex finishes developing, but really critical time frame that we're looking at is that birth to 7, 8, even up to 12 time range. That is a really heightened developmental time. So if we experience trauma, and again, I can't define what that means, but if we experience trauma, what can happen literally and physically in our brain is that this amygdala right here overdevelops. And you can see in this model, the amygdala is quite small in comparison to everything else. But what we often forget is that when we are developing, our brain develops from the bottom up. It's like building those stair steps. You can't just get up. You have to take one step at a time. And so it starts down there. So when we are little, when those toddlers, those kiddos, all they really have to rely on is that amygdala. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we instinctively, without even thinking about it, go straight to fight, flight, freeze, fawn for situations that may not seem totally necessary. But even more than that, when we have someone that has experienced trauma, that amygdala can overdevelop. And so in most people's brains, or not most people, but people who have not experienced trauma, their brain might be nice and proportionate and make sense. But when we've experienced trauma, sometimes that amygdala can be overdeveloped, making our brain look a little bit more like this. So a little bit, not enlarged, but putting pressure is what I like to call it on the top or the prefrontal cortex. And so what happens is when that watchdog starts barking, and that could be a result of anything. If you have a dog, you know that sometimes they bark from anything from a leaf blowing to, a stranger coming in your house or something chasing them or, whatever it may be. The barking isn't always rationalized. It's always doesn't always make sense why they're barking. And then the same thing is true in our brains, right? So when a person experiences something, a trigger of some sort, that amygdala, boom, pushes up on that prefrontal cortex. And suddenly, that's what I like to call flipping your lid. And so when we work with kiddos, we'll say they can even do, I think my lid is flipped, Miss Hannah. Like I flipped my lid. And that just means I feel out of control, or I feel stress. Something is bothering me. And so it's important for them to understand, and for us to understand as working professionals, that when that lid is flipped, we cannot speak to that rational part of the brain. It's offline. It has blown into the wind, right? We no longer have the ability to reason. And so now we need to speak to that watchdog. And that is a very different process than speaking to the wise owl. And a lot of times, what needs to happen is we get the kiddo or the person, spoiler alert, adults can flip their lids too. And you've probably seen it happen or experienced it yourself a time or two. But when we flip that lid, our brain doesn't understand that, hey, I'm not being chased by a bear or I'm not in immediate danger. It could be something very, very minor, like a smell or a temperature change or pain of some sort, that causes that lid to flip. We have a kiddo in our camp program here in West Virginia, and he really struggles with keeping his lid on tight. And it can be flipped from something like a splinter, or, last year he accidentally got hot sauce in his eye and that flipped our lid, right? And so you just never know what the trigger is going to be. But when it flips, there is a wide variety of responses there. And so we want to be super sensitive to those responses. And a lot of times what that means is we need to get the lid back on before we can approach the behavior. So that's some things we're going to talk about today. So again, with this, when this watchdog takes over and starts barking, it becomes very overstimulating. The logic flipped, gone, offline. There is no ability to access that reasoning, the logic, the decision making. It's offline. Our memory in this case is also affected time and time and time again. I work a lot with foster parents, and we work a lot with talking about their kiddos' behaviors. And so often I hear our foster parents say, they're not reliable. The kiddo is not reliable in what they're saying or their storytelling or things like that. And I don't know when I learned this, but so at some point in my career, I learned that every time you tell a story, you tell it a little bit. You maybe not realize it, but you tell it a little bit differently each time because our memory is affected by events, even positive events, but especially trauma affects that memory. And so that is a lot of times why people who have experienced extreme trauma often have no memory of it because their brain and their memory is A, it's a protective measure, but B, because that amygdala was so in control, that hippocampus, that happy hippo, he kind of had to leave too. And then all we have is our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn activated. So remember, that was our first topic is how does trauma affect the brain? Well, here are 5 major ways that we can know and that we can tell our kiddos that we're working with, this is how your brain is affected. Number 1, we can flip our lid. So our alert system goes into overdrive. It is okay to teach someone that you are working with, like, hey, your alert system is in overdrive and that is not your fault, right? That is not your fault. Your brain is doing that because that is all it knows how to do. And that is okay. And we're going to figure out how to work around that or with that. Number 2, your memory becomes unreliable. The hippocampus, the happy hippo, he's real cloudy. He's got his I like to talk about how the noise canceling headphones that we offer, he's got his noise canceling headphones on, that happy hippo does, and he is not able to remember exactly what happened. Number 3, the body holds the stress. Our bodies have a physical response to the trauma. And so a lot of times in kiddos and adults who've experienced trauma, we see things like a lot of tummy trouble, right? Like our stomach is always hurting or in knots or nauseous. We might see a lot of tension headaches. We might see shoulder or back pain, joint pain, because our body really does hold on to that trauma. It stores it in different places in our body. And again, the body keeps the score. Number 4, physical and emotional brain cannot regulate. So the body systems remain on alert pretty much at all times. If someone has experienced trauma, their natural state, like I said, is not closed and comfortable. It's a little bit uncomfortable at all times. We're a little bit flipped at all times because it's preparing for needing to protect itself and completely flip their lid. Number 5, the brain learns to predict the worst. And so and a lot of, and I just, it is so unfortunate how often, we get a kiddo, we're looking at their case and we're seeing the repetition of negative things that have happened in their poor little life. And it's like, how is that even possible? But what unfortunately that teaches their brain is I have to be prepared for the worst thing to happen. And if you've ever fostered and if you've ever worked with kiddos who are at risk, you will know that their behavior reflects that. Their behavior is often telling us, I expect something bad to happen, so I'm going to act as if it is going to happen. And so our job as caring adults is to try to rewrite that script for them and say, that is not always going to be the case. Bad things can happen and they will happen, and that is life. But we want to equip you to be able to say, that is not my full story. And there are other ways to respond than a constant state of negativity. Okay, so some behaviors that we might see from someone who is flipping their lid or is living in a heightened state of trauma impacted nervous system, physical, all of those things. Someone who has experienced trauma, we might see that intense anger. Anger that doesn't necessarily equate to what they're experiencing. And I know most of you probably know this, but it's always good to have that reminder. You might see withdrawn behaviors. They no longer are talking. They seem very like they're in a shell. That can happen a lot of times. Avoidance altogether. Some trauma responses, I don't want to even approach it. And so we avoid it entirely. Isolation. Some people prefer to be alone and kind of process that on their own. We might see heightened emotion. So very quickly 0 to 100 in that response to any situation, really. Like I said, a splinter or hot sauce in the eye, that heightened emotion where some of us might be able to say, okay, I'll get the splinter out. They're not able to process that. We do also see self-harm behaviors. We know in our population of individuals who have experienced trauma, one of the ways that the brain deals with that pain is through self-harm. So we want to be very mindful of that. Apathy or substance abuse, that goes with self-harm as well. But apathy is they don't care. They don't seem to care about anything. They're a student in your class or one that you're working with, and they seem to have no desire to give any effort. And that is a very typical response when our brain is offline. The inappropriate emotional response. So sometimes when we're working with kiddos or teens who have experienced trauma, their emotional age is very different from their actual age. That is a question that we ask our caregivers for camp is, okay, how old is the kiddo? They're 10. How old are they emotionally? They're 5, right? It could be very different. It could even be they're 10, but they're emotionally 15 or 20. It goes on either end of the spectrum, but the emotional response could be very difficult or very different from their actual age. And so we need to keep that in mind when we're working with them because oftentimes as adults, we have an expectation on youth and children to say, you're 12, we need to act like we're 12, but that's not always doable for them. And so we need to approach them from their emotional age, not necessarily the age on their paper. We also see again those physical responses, that extreme fatigue. They're always tired, they're always sleeping. Like I mentioned, stomach issues, sleep disorders. They can't sleep, or they oversleep, or they sleep at weird times. Headaches, those aches and body aches and pains, dissociation, which is when you are visibly offline, you are checked out of the situation. That often is the first response when an individual is overwhelmed, is their brain just kind of pulls them out of it, to try to protect from what might be happening. Panic, so a heightened sense of anxiety and panic, being overly worried about everything, asking a lot of questions. What's next? When? How? Especially around food. A lot of times, if a child has food insecurity, we'll see a lot of questions about that. Relational challenges, so trouble making friends, trouble keeping friends, difficulty building that trust with someone else. And then poor performance in their activities in school, in sports, extracurriculars, whatever it may be. The similar to apathy there, that desire, that willpower, that driving force is sometimes just not in control there. Okay, so now we understand how trauma impacts the brain. And we know that it does. And we know that that can make the brain look different, act different, sound different, all of those things. So now what do we do with that? And how do we use that information to view someone else? Having a trauma sensitive lens impacts the way we see everyone that we interact with. So this, like I said at the beginning, while this is geared towards students who have experienced trauma, this also impacts all of our relationships. And I know everyone says, like, you never know what someone else is going through, but that's true, right? And we're doing a disservice to ourselves and our relationships if we do not view everyone with a lens of empathy, right? That is just how we make the world a kinder place, is to always be approaching it from a place of, I don't know what you have experienced, but I am going to put on the lens of understanding. How we speak to someone, how we respond to someone, how we perceive how they are interacting with us, and how we build trust is all impacted by having a trauma sensitive lens. So these are some typical responses that we might hear from someone who is a non-trauma informed individual. So a child might be acting out and someone might say, well, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Right? Why are you acting like that? Your behavior is really bad. Like, you are being so bad right now. And that's a no-no, because we're labeling the child as good or bad, and they are not. It is actions, right? So we don't ever want to say you are being so bad. But we can definitely bring attention and highlight to the choice that is being made. Did no one teach you how to act, right? You don't act right. Why aren't you listening to me? We know that children and teens and even adults who have experienced trauma have a delayed auditory time. A really good example of this, I have a coworkers, a person we work with, and she does a lot of trainings for our TBRI, and she has kiddos that she fostered. And one of them was bouncing a ball and like against the wall, a bouncy ball. And it was like hitting pictures and hitting things. And so she said, hey, bud, I need you to not bounce the ball inside. And he keeps bouncing it. And her response wants to be, I just told you to stop bouncing the ball. Why did you not listen to me? But she gave it a few minutes and he stopped. And so often we see that if we give their brain time to process the information, they will, right? But our expectation is, I told you, do it immediately. And yes, in some kiddos, that is the case. But again, trauma sensitive lens is understanding that that auditory response time, for the time that it takes for them to hear and to get to their brain and to do the action, is slower than someone who has not been impacted by trauma. And so we need to provide grace for that. Gentle reminders, right? Um, Asking them to repeat back to you what was said instead of jumping straight to, you aren't listening to me. You're so lazy. Again, labeling the child, not coming from a perspective of understanding or a trauma-informed view. The posturing of someone who is uninformed often can come from a place of judgment. So when we do not have the proper information and the proper knowledge to approach a situation, we tend to have an immediate sense of judgment or impatience towards the situation. And I had to remind myself of this last night. One of my kiddos, he was in his first play, which was super fun. But afterwards, we went to get ice cream to celebrate. And when we got there, we were the second person in line. And so you think, okay, this won't be bad. And we stood there for 20 minutes without getting served because the person in front of us was having an issue. And your immediate response is to judge, complain, be frustrated. And I will admit I was frustrated. But I also didn't have all the information. And so because I was uninformed, I don't feel that it is my place to be judgmental of the situation. It still is going to make me feel frustrated, but it's what you do with that information. So when we know better, when we are informed, we do better. And that is just with anything, right? If you don't know how to cook something and you don't have a recipe, you're most likely going to do something wrong. But if you're equipped, you're given the information, it's going to be a much better turnout. So we need to know that when we have the information, we often do better if we apply it. We can have information, we can sit through a million trainings just like this and never apply the information. And we're not doing justice to what the information we're being given. So when we know better, we do better. So this is what responses from a trauma-informed individual might look like. Sort of the opposite there. Instead of saying, what's wrong with you, our internal lens switches to what happened, right? What happened to you? What's causing this response? What do you need? That is a really powerful question. I often ask this because I have a 3-year-old and he is a 3-year-old. And 3-year-olds, like I said earlier, have no wise owl. And so a lot of times I like to ask him, what do you need from mommy? Like, what is it that would help you feel better? Because a lot of times we want something, but what we want isn't actually what we need. And so figuring out the root of what we need can be really helpful. What is causing you to be out of balance? So we have at camp and at mentoring programs, a tool that we use with our kiddos is a emotion meter. And so there's 3 ranges. There's green, which if you're in the green, you're good to go. You're feeling good. All systems in check. Our engine is running good. If you're in the yellow, your engine is running slow. Like we're feeling like we need some help. We're feeling really tired. We're feeling cranky, those sorts of things. If our engine is in the red, we are flipping our lid. We are feeling like we are out of control. And so what we do is we put those pictures, those engine plates, places where the kids can always see them and are reminded of that. And so they can communicate to you, hey, Miss Anna, I am feeling real red right now. And then Miss Anna, and I know, okay, here's what we can do to get you back to green. So what's causing that out of balance and what do we need to do to fix it? How can I give you calm? As adults and as caretakers and as providers, our role, one of our many, many roles, is to provide calm. not to heighten, not to continue to antagonize that watchdog, but to bring that wise owl back into play. And so how can we do that, right? Um, that's a tool as well. What is most helpful to you? Asking that is very empowering because what's most helpful to me might not be what's most helpful to someone else. And so knowing that individual specifically is really important. Letting them know they're seen and they're heard. Hey, I see you. I hear you. That's powerful too. I'm here for you. Reminding them that your presence is because you care about them, and you are there to support them. And then what would make this easier for you? How can I come alongside you to make this easier for you? And this is just a small sampling of questions, internal and external, that we can ask that shifts that perspective to view someone through a trauma sensitive lens. Okay, we already know that trauma alters the brain. You knew that before. I guarantee you knew that before you jumped on this webinar today. But if you didn't, now you do. But the brain chemistry can be re-altered by felt safety. So just because we have kiddos that have experienced that trauma, that does not mean that they have to be stuck in that altered brain chemistry. Is that trauma always going to impact their brain in some form or fashion? Yes, right? We can't erase history, but what we can do is re-alter that brain chemistry so that it feels or is reminded of that safety and that trust before automatically flipping their lid. And I just love these pictures on here because these are all from our camp and mentoring programs. And in each of these pictures, I see an example where the brain chemistry is being re-altered, right? In the picture at the pool, that counselor is sitting with a kiddo and doing something they want to do and providing a happy hippo memory. Same down below, right? With the bubbles, like they are having a brain altering, chemistry building felt safety. There's empowerment happening where the guy's giving the kiddo a crown, right? He is showing him that he should be treated royally, which is something we emphasize. And then in the bottom, the counselor and his kiddo are holding hands and they're walking. And that is an opportunity to create a moment out of what seems like nothing that can re-alter that brain chemistry. So you might be like, okay, what's felt safety? Felt safety is helping a child to feel safe, secure, and heard. We have the ability to do that as caring adults, and you wouldn't be in this field or you wouldn't be on this webinar if you didn't care about the kiddos that you have been entrusted with. And so we want to help a child feel safe, secure, and heard. Now, how? How do you do that? Well, nurturing and safe touch. Kiddos who have experienced trauma do not often have a good and healthy understanding of safe touch. And so one important thing to keep in mind is to always ask permission when working with these kiddos. Is it okay if I hug you? Is it okay if I hold your hand? Whatever it may be that you were trying to comfort them. But rebuilding that understanding of safe touch can be really healing to that brain chemistry. Kind eyes, right? This also means getting down on their level. It's so funny because all of my coworkers are, trust-based relationally intervention trained, and that is a big thing of getting down on their level. And when we went to Texas recently with all my coworkers and my kids came, and it was like a room of all my coworkers, and my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old were the only two kids there at the time. And so my 3-year-old walks in the room. It was almost funny. All of my coworkers were like down to talk to him. And I just saw him light up and feel so confident and happy because these people knew how to talk to him, right? They got down on his level. They made eye contact with him. They got engaged in what he was interested in, and he left that room feeling so loved and cared for. And that is what we can provide a kiddo just by getting down on their level and making that eye contact. Your tone of voice matters. when I was teaching with Mission West Virginia, we had a specific talk that we did with our high schoolers about communication. And one of the things we focused on was the tone of voice, body, and body language. Those two things matter far more than the actual words you are saying. An individual perceives your tone of voice and your body language, and so much so that only 7% of what they really are taking away from the conversation is your actual words. The rest of it is how you're saying it and what you are presenting when you say it. So if we're closed off and we're looking down and we're really frustrated, right? That's the reception of that is not going to be positive. But if we can perk up and we can engage and we can make eye contact, that is so much more powerful. And some people just have I like to tell my husband, he's one of these people, a harsher tone of voice. Literally doesn't mean to be, but your voice is just naturally harsher. And so we have to be mindful of that. Like, how are we being perceived? Behavior matching is really powerful. If a kiddo is being goofy, be goofy, right? That's going to help them feel like you are on their team. I had a kiddo at camp once who was wanting to hide under the bed and not do anything and go anywhere. And so what did I do? Well, I got under the bunk next to him and we both hid under the bed. And he was like, "What are you doing?" Right? "And why are you an adult under the bed?" "Well, I'm under the bed just like you are, and we can sit here and talk." And guess what? He came out from under the bed because we were leveling, right, with each other. And so sometimes you have to do what they're doing in order for them to feel connected. And then engagement, right? Well, how can we engage with that child, that youth, in a way that they feel heard and seen? If we had a kiddo over the other day, one of our friends' kids, and he really likes Pokemon. And my husband was just chatting up, just letting him talk away about Pokemon, asking him all these questions. And when it was time to leave, his parents were like, "Come on, we gotta go." And he was like, "I will, but Philip is the only one that really listens to me about this stuff." And it's not that he was doing anything special. He was just engaging with him on a topic that he wanted to talk about. And so that's a really powerful tool when we're working with anybody, engaging in what they want to talk about. Okay. So now we know trauma impacts the brain. We know now, hopefully, how to view someone through a trauma sensitive lens. And now we are going to talk about how to build relationships and trust. And if you have questions, just by the way, please put them in the chat because I've left a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So please feel free to ask and I'll get to them at the end. But now we're going to build on what we know. So the foundation of all of our interactions is understanding how the brain is impacted. Then we put that into how we view and understand and perceive. And then we put that into an action step. So that's hopefully what we're going to talk about here. So we have, when we're talking about trust-based relational intervention, we have 3 principles that we really like to focus on. And that is connect, empower, correct. And so these 3 principles really work more for serving the younger kiddos and youth in general. Not so much adults, but I guarantee you there are principles or components of each principle that can be altered when working with adults. So we're going to walk through each of these principles and talk about some practical ways that you can implement them. And so again, super fun. The picture in the middle is actually my husband from camp a few years ago with one of his campers. So connect, empower, correct. Okay, connect. So connection is the first step in building trust. If we cannot connect with someone, we do not trust them. And you realize this more and more as you get older. The people that you meet, you don't always connect with everyone, right? But if you don't have a connection to an individual on some level, oftentimes you're not going to trust them with your information, with your heart condition, right? Like your emotions. You're not going to trust them if you don't connect with them. And this is a super important thing to keep in mind. Children and youth, teenagers, are not automatically going to connect with everyone who tries to connect with them. They're just not. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Um, it's not a personal thing, but sometimes their brain is still in that protective mode. A good example of this is I had many years ago, I was a counselor at the camp that I now do for my job. And that was a volunteer job, but I was given a camper and we do one-on-one pairings as much as possible, so that you're building that attention and that connection and all of those things I'm talking about. But anyway, I was paired with a kiddo and I did everything I knew and was trained to do, and she didn't care for me. She did not build that. She did not reciprocate that. And I was very, as you know, an 18-year-old, very hurt by that because I thought it was something that I was doing. And then I was reminded by all the more experienced people than me that it is not anything personal. And it turns out by the end of the week, she did share with me that I looked like her mom and her mom had hurt her. And she had lost her mom actually just 6 months prior to coming to camp. And so, did I do the right or hopefully the right things? Yeah. Did she respond to it? No, but her brain was already protecting her from me solely because my hair was curly and brown and her mom's hair was curly and brown. Um, and those sorts of things that I wasn't thinking about. So just remember when you're working with kiddos, you can do all the right things, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be reciprocated. But then sometimes, and we all probably know, there are kiddos who just latch and right on to you and they pick you, right? And you're their person or they feel safe with you. And doing these steps can certainly help in any situation and interaction with that felt safety because we want to build that felt safety so we can alter that brain chemistry to be healthier in the long run. So what does connection look like? Well, it's having conversation, right? It's that confidence building, um, which comes with validating what the child or the individual or the youth is saying. This is engaging with them in any activity or anything that they're interested in, finding a way to do something together with that child or youth. And it might be that, especially with teenagers these days, you have to engage with something you have never heard of, right? But sometimes that's fun. We can learn. That includes that safe touch. That includes those things I've talked about, getting on the level of the other person, showing interest in what they're interested in. We live in a day and age where we are constantly on our phones. And that pulls us out of that connectivity. When we're sitting in a room with our family and we're all looking down at a screen, we are not connected to one another. And I'm not like anti-phone. I think there's definitely that can help you to reset. That can be something you do to get your lid back on, right? If you flip your lid. But we have to remember what connection looks like. When I was at Mission West Virginia teaching, we talked about social media and how a lot of times we think we are more connected because of it. And in some ways we are, but in a lot of ways we're not. And so we have to remember what actual connection looks like with someone in the same room as us. And that is showing listening or showing interest and active listening. Active listening is when you are able to make eye contact, when you are able to understand not just what the person is saying, but the intent behind what they're saying. That is when you are able to repeat back what you heard and you're able to ask questions about it. Active listening is not, yeah. Oh, cool. Mm-hmm. Right. Um, Active listening is, and what color was that? That is so cool. So you're telling me you saw a red bird yesterday, right? Like, what was it doing? What was it doing? Like those sorts of things, that's active listening, that's engagement, that's building that confidence and felt safety um with anybody. Your tone of voice and your questions are different depending on the age level, but the principles remain the same. Empowerment. So we have that connection point. And then once we are able to feel that we have a confident connection with somebody else, and then you might think, okay, well, how long does that take? Beats me, right? Your time frame of connection varies depending on what that person has, what their background is, what they've experienced, their age, right? A lot of times, little kiddos, um, sometimes it takes them a long time. Like my 1-year-old, she is gonna probably take about 6 months to warm up to you. But other kids, I mean, in 5 minutes, you're their best friend, right? Adults might take months. There really is no time frame on connection, but I think that most of us are able to understand when we have made a connection with someone else. Um, and when we feel we have that connection, we can build on that with what we call empowerment. So we empower to build on the foundation of connection. And this empowerment, this next step in the tool, impacts the physiological and the ecological factors. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. And this picture, I just love it. They did this a lot of times at camps. We have time to dress up, or we'll have a fancy tea party or a ball or whatever it may be, and we'll give the kiddos pretty dresses and get the boys suits, and that is empowering them. And these counselors and the staff here cheering for them, that's empowering them. So they made that connection with them through the mentorship, and they're empowering them, and that does wonders for the heart, for the soul, and for that brain chemistry. So, some empowering principles, like I just said, it impacts the physiological and the ecological parts of our systems. So, physiological, this would be meeting the internal needs of an individual. So, 3 questions that I like to ask is: Are you tired? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to be a little hangry when I'm hungry. And it is an ongoing joke in my family, especially with my husband, that if I'm being short or extra aggravated or, quick, sharp with my tone, he's like, "All right, are you what do you want to eat?" Because usually as soon as I take 2 or 3 bites, my mood is right back to happy and whatever. So we got to remember that sometimes with these kiddos, when that lid is flipped, their internal needs might not be met. My toddler, he must have got the hangry gene because he will have these big explosions over something that's not really needed. But I will look at him and say, "Hey, do you want a snack?" And a lot of times he eats that snack and it brings that lid back on and we can have a conversation. When you're thinking about how to empower and how to meet those physiological needs, if you are someone working with kiddos, I highly recommend carrying or having or offering snacks. Good, healthy snacks, you know, uh, protein bars or cheese strings or sometimes just like little popcorn, whatever it may be, water, Powerade, whatever that can bring, that can meet those physiological needs. Because again, when our wise owl is flown away, flown the coop, we cannot speak to that brain. That amygdala, he didn't listen. And so we have to get the wise owl back. And one way that we can do that is through meeting those internal needs of being hungry or thirsty. Or maybe we're very, very tired. Um, we have big emotions when we're tired. And sometimes, and I know I'm one of those people that likes to deal with the situation right now. I want it dealt with. I want the conversation to happen. But sometimes we have to understand that, again, we cannot in that moment. This moment is not going to be an effective time to solve a problem. And so we might have to meet those physiological needs first. We might need to eat and drink some water and take a nap. And that's okay. It might just be what needs to happen before we can address the next step. So now the ecological needs, which is meeting the environment and external needs. When I'm real hot, I don't like the summer that much because I get real hot. Uh, my mood isn't cranky. I just is. And kids and adults and youth are all the same way. We make sure that all of our kiddos have a handheld fan at camps in the summer because when we're hot, we get irritable, right? And so being able to cool down, that affects that ecological need being met. Same time, like with sleep, if they're not comfortable, they're not going to sleep well. That ecological need is not met. A huge factor to this ecological need is information sharing. So anxiety goes down when information goes up. Um, I don't know if you've ever been with a kiddo in a new environment, but they oftentimes have a lot of questions. Where are we going? What are we doing? What's my 3-year-old will even be like, what color's the room gonna be? Right? I don't know. What are we gonna eat when we get there? How long do we have? Are we there yet? Where have we got? So these are very normal questions. And we have them as adults. That's why we use Google, right? We Google everything. We Google what the parking's going to be like. We Google what the menu looks like before we go somewhere because if I do not like to go somewhere where I don't know how I'm going to park, and that makes me anxious. And so if I can see and know, my anxiety goes down and now I'm more excited and I'm more present because I know what to expect. And so for some reason as adults when we're working with kids, and I don't know that we do it intentionally, but we don't always give them all of the information. We'll be like, we're gonna go there later, or we just do things without telling them. And so one thing that we implement at camp is having a visual schedule for the kiddos. And so they have like icons and they know what those icons mean and they can see what their day looks like. And that brings that anxiety down. Giving warnings. Hey, you've got 10 minutes left. You've got 5 minutes left. You've got 2 minutes left. That brings that anxiety down because you're not just ripping something from them. Transition time is very hard for kiddos, especially those who have been through trauma. And so we don't ever want to just rip the band-aid. We want to provide those skills or those tools rather, to help them succeed. And so one thing that we do, and this is in the theater world, if someone says, hey, there's 10 minutes until the show starts, you're supposed to respond with, thank you, 10. So you're saying, hey, I heard you and I heard the number you said. And so we do that with our kiddos too. They got 5 minutes left on the playground. Okay, thank you, 5. Thank you, mommy. Or I heard you, 5, right? And while kids don't always understand time, they do understand that that means there is going to be a transition soon. And so you are empowering them by giving them the tools to understand limitations, schedule, time frames, and the information that they need to not be anxious. So always remember, information is going to be helpful to the situation, and you might have to alter the information depending on the age of the child, but that is a way to empower them so that they feel like they have some control. And that's an important thing to remember too, is when we have experienced trauma, a lot of the times our voice and our control has been taken from us. And any way that we can bring little pieces of that back is empowering. Now, I'm not saying that now that child needs to be the boss and now needs to control the situation. Absolutely not. We are still the adults, we are still the caregivers, we are still the providers, but it is going to be so much smoother, so much more felt safety if we provide them with that empowerment and that choice. So, empowering principles, how can we be proactive when working with youth and children? So, number one, I just started to talk about it, but providing choices. What's important to keep in mind here is when we are providing choices to someone, both of those choices need to be reasonable and doable. It shouldn't be, hey, do you want to go to the park or Disney World, right? Knowing you can't go to Disney World. One way that I do this with my 3-year-old, I pick out 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts, 2 pairs of socks, every day, and I let him pick, right? Do you want to wear these pants or these pants? And so it's still within reason of I know what the weather is and I know how you need to dress to be comfortable today and whatever activity we're doing, but he is getting to choose between those two things. Same thing with snacks, right? It's not a free for all. Do you want brownies, chips, cookies, but do you want this applesauce or do you want this granola bar? Right. And so they're choosing, you're empowering them for the choice, but the choice is within reason and it's doable. Number two, being willing to compromise. This is hard sometimes because we as adults feel that sometimes, not everybody, but some personalities are very my way or the highway. And we can become very stubborn in thinking that our way is the right way. And this is with children and other adults. It doesn't really matter who we're working with. Sometimes we have a tendency to think our way is the right way. And so being willing to find a compromise with someone else is very empowering to the relationship. It might look like setting a boundary that again is within reason, but is giving voice to the other person or is actually saying, hey, I hear and see your perspective. How can we bring that into the picture? Super important. Number three, speaking with respect. And this can take practice, right? It is so easy, especially with kids, if they're talking to you disrespectfully, to then echo that. But that is not progressing the situation to a positive place. One, that is possibly reflective of how they have been communicated with in the past that did not go well, therefore increasing the likelihood of that lid being flipped. Number two, it is teaching them that that is okay to speak to someone that way. And number three, that is detaching those connection points that have already been made. And so one thing that we do at camp and mentoring is if a child speaks to us with disrespect, we offer a redo. And so we will say, can you try that again with respect? And it doesn't work every time, of course, but instead of responding in a negative way, you're reminding them that the way that they responded to you was not respectful and that you're not going to flip out and they're not in trouble right now, but they have an opportunity to do it again. That right there is empowerment in itself. Giving a child an opportunity to redo a bad choice or a negative choice is very, very powerful. Now, are they always going to have that opportunity in life? No. But our hope and our goal is that we are scaffolding them to learn how to make the proper choice the right time. If we automatically discipline them the first time, we are missing the opportunity to scaffold them and to teach them how to make a correct decision. And so we can come alongside them and say, hey, that was not kind. That was not what I asked you to do. but could you try it again with respect? And even empowering their character, saying things like, I know you are capable of making the right choice. I know that you are kind and that your heart is kind and gracious and loving. And I need you to show me what that looks like or what that sounds like. Um, so communication tools, um, providing choices, being willing to compromise, and speaking with respect. All right, so we at this point of correction, again, we have done connect, empower, and now we can come in with the correction. When we have to correct, and oftentimes we do in working with kids and youth, it's important that it's first built on that connection. If you are a substitute teacher, you've never met these kids before, and you come in there and you start trying to discipline you, and I've seen this a million times because I've been in the school system, they laugh a lot of times, or they just don't do it because they're not, who are you, right? They're not connected to you. And so correction is successful when connection comes first. Correction is successful when connection comes first. Through connection and empowerment, we have built that trust with that other person that then allows us the safety to correct them. That allows their brain to say, hey, Happy Hippo's there, Wise Owl is there. This person is safe. They are allowed to speak to me in this way. And I know they're not actually saying those things, but the brain is processing all of this of they now have that felt safety, which makes them more receptive to the correction. On the flip side of that, we do see when a child feels connected to someone and safe with someone, they more often will push boundaries and show behaviors that might be deemed as negative because they feel safe. So that's important to remember too. I don't know if you've ever realized or if you've seen this a lot of times that kiddos are behave worse for their moms and their dads than they do other people because they feel safe and they feel like they are allowed to show you that true emotion. And so honor that. Honor that they feel safe, but understand that that connection and that empowerment has to be in place for proper connection to happen. So here are some practical tools and principles when we are correcting. So first things first, stay calm. If you start yelling and screaming and throwing and kicking and huffing, nah, that's not going to go well, right? The kid is not going to respond to that. The adult is not going to respond to that. Staying calm, your calm creates their calm. About an hour ago, I talked about behavior matching. This is a case where we don't want to do that. We want them to echo us. So a lot of times if my 3-year-old is freaking out and he's got his voice way up and he's in the red engine zone, I'll talk really soft like this and I'll say, can you please talk how I'm talking? And try to talk how mommy's talking. And that brings him down to a calm. Again, connection first. Rules without a relationship is going to equal resistance. If you do not have an open relationship with an individual where they feel safe connecting with you and talking with you and sharing with you, then your rules and regulations are only going to be met with a resistance. But if they have a respect for you and a connection with you, then those rules and regulations are met with a sense of respect and understanding. So stay calm, make sure you've got that connection point, meet the need. Again, ecological, physiological, is there a need that's happening? Is this individual freaking out because they have not had lunch? That could be the case. Let's get their needs met before we discipline and before we try to create a teachable moment. Let's make sure those needs are met. Be curious and not furious. All behavior is a communication. They are responding that way and they are acting that way because of something under the iceberg. That's what we always said in when we were teaching at Mission. There's something, this iceberg that you're seeing, there's something under it that is causing that reaction. And so we want to be curious about the reaction, not instantly go to a place of anger. Find the yes. When we have the opportunity to say yes, that is empowerment in itself. Um, Even the way that we respond to things. If we are always approaching from a negative instance, don't run around the pool. Don't run around the pool. Studies have shown that what children hear is the last half, or their brain automatically goes, I'm not supposed to do that, so I'm going to do it. So instead, we can say the same thing and say, hey, walk around the pool. You're getting the same, you're telling them the same thing, but you're approaching it from a yes mindset instead of a no mindset. Voice and choice. So give them a voice through compromises and offering choices. All of those empowering principles I talked about. This comes into play too when you are correcting. So this is our pyramid of building a trust, building relationships with trust. Connection, empowerment, correction. When we need to correct, we correct the behavior, we go back to connect. And it has to be a rotating cycle like this. When I need to correct my 3-year-old's behavior, it's not always comfortable for either of us. But once that behavior is corrected, I need to go back to that connection. So he knows that he is not unheard or unseen or unloved. He is loved and seen and heard, but we still have to correct that behavior. But again, correction is possible when connection is successful. So we have to have the cycle going where we have that connection and empowerment ready when the correction needs to be made, and then we go back and do it again. So these are principles for building trust. How we approach our relationships matters. Number one, shift your perspective. If you are noticing that you are automatically having those thoughts of judgment and frustration, how can you shift your perspective to look through a different lens? Number two, regulation and safety matter, right? We have to be able to come alongside each other and offer regulation. Sometimes when children and youth and adults are dysregulated, they need someone else to bring them back down to that point of regulation. And many of you are that someone else. So using that tools to provide that safety builds that trust. Understand triggers. Every individual has different triggers. When we understand those and then we approach from that knowledge, again, that's building trust. When we have kiddos at camp that we know are sensitive to sound, we equip them with canceling headphones. If we're going to have a loud experience, we put those on before we go even go in, and they know, they have that trust in us that we are caring for them and understanding what they need. Stay away from assumption. Assumption can be a very negative thing in any of our relationships because we cannot read minds. I wish we could. Well, I don't know if I wish we could or not, but we don't know. We don't know. And as much as we can play detective and figure things out, we don't have that information unless the other person steps in and says, hey, this is true or not true. And so staying away from assumption of behaviors, is really important when we're building trust. Focus on connection. When we can put that as a foundation, then all of these other things tend to kind of fall into place a little bit easier. Recognizing the strengths of the other person and using that as a tool is really, really empowering too. So when we have these children or youth who have flipped their lid, obviously, and they're in that red engine zone, there are things that we can do to bring them back to a point of green or calm. There's some physical things that you can do. If a kiddo is really acting out physically, doing chair push-ups or wall push-ups. So, I might say I had a kindergartner once and he was just woo off the walls all the time. And I would tell him like, it's time for your wall pushes. We would say, how hard can we push to knock this wall down? And he and I would do it together. We'd push really, really hard on the wall because that is sensory reception, right? And that is bringing that nervous system back down to a green state. Doing the same thing. Can you push yourself off your chair really, really hard a bunch of times? Breathing exercises like can you what I'll do this with my 3-year-old. Okay, you really like chicken noodle soup. Okay, can you pretend you have chicken noodle soup and now we're gonna smell the chicken noodle soup and we're gonna blow on the chicken noodle soup and cool it down, right? And that's doing that breathing, Xbox breathing, any breathing exercise. Magic mustache. You have receptors here in your upper lip that actually bring the nervous system back down. So we'll do magic mustache. You can give yourself a mustache and be really silly with it and push hard right there. That can bring that back down too. Also tapping right here, doing taps is very helpful. So those are tools that you can bring out. Chewing gum. All of those things bring that nervous system down. But secondly, if you understand the strengths, what that child, what that individual, that youth is really good at, and you bring that into play as you're meeting those needs, that then is going to help you correct because you're using what they are good at. You are reminding them of a positive to then reverse the action of the negative. Number 7, meet the need. Again, figure out what it is, even if they can't communicate it, do your best to figure out what it is, to build that trust. And then lastly, we have give a voice. So again, that is that empowering principle of the more that an individual feels that they have control over a situation, the less anxious they will be, the less likely they will flip their lid, the more that they will trust what is going on. And so if we can provide that in our relationships, if we can actively listen to one another, we are in a setting up for a much better place of relationship with each other. And so that is really how to build relationships with a trauma sensitive lens, understanding that the brain is impacted. Shifting our perspective to view each other through a place of how can I help instead of why are you doing that way? I think that this is true no matter who we are building our relationship with. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old. These principles can apply to any relationship that we are embarking on. And so remembering that your voice matters, what you say matters, how you receive that information, all of that is really, really important, especially to build those relationships. So I'm gonna see if we have any questions. Can we have the camp and intern information from the pics? Yes, if you're talking about like the information for Royal Family Kids Camp and mentoring, I can certainly share that and have Hillary share that with you guys. If for those of you that are social workers on the call, we have currently one chapter in West Virginia that serves children ages 6 to 12 through that mentorship of building that relationship with a trusted adult. If you are a social worker, you can send the information to your caregivers and guardians. We are booked for this summer, but we're always taking applications for the next summers. And then of course, we're always taking volunteers and things like that as well. meeting them where they are. I find the exact thing. Yes, yeah, Courtney. It very, very true. We all just need someone to meet us where we are. And that is how we build trust, right? That's how we view each other from a place of respect, is meeting someone where they are. And like I said earlier, that might mean getting down on their actual physical level, but that also might be getting on their emotional level and understanding with empathy what each other is going through as well. Being proactive is so important. Yes, being proactive. I don't see any more questions. Hillary, do you have any questions or anything else?
I don't. I think the only thing that I saw was really a lot of requests for your slides
Great. I
and
will share
info.
those. Yeah.
So we will be sharing those. I just shared a link for the evaluation. And again, reminder to everyone, the certificates will be out. Look for those next week. So if you don't get one by next Friday, then please shoot us an email. But if it's any time before that, just know they're coming. We're working on them. So Anna, so good to see you.
It was so good to
Please
be here.
come join us. Come hang out at the lunch table.
I
You know
will.
we're here having a good time every day.
It's always a good time. I'm a big Mission West Virginia fan, and I'm very thankful that I got to share and just talk with you guys today.
Yes, thank you. This was so good. And then just I'm going to shout out our program a little bit more. Someone asked if we can rewatch this. Yes, there will be a link in our emails for the evaluation, for your certificate information, with the slides, and then a link to the recording of this session for everyone who attended. Um, don't forget we have 2 more webinars coming up this month, one next week with Jim Harris, and then we have a series of 4 that we're going to be doing with EndTab, which is about digital safety. June is digital/internet safety month, so we have our behind the screen in-person conference training on June 2nd, and then 3 follow-up webinars after that in June as well. So everybody look out for information, follow us on Facebook, um, check out our emails if you get them. And again, Anna, thank you.
You are
Appreciate
so
you.
welcome. You are so
And
welcome
bring those
anytime.
babies too.
I know I will.
Bring them. They're so beautiful.
Thank you
All
guys. I appreciate it.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.